Shari, can we start with just having you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work?
Sure. I am anti-racism trainer. I've been doing it for about 4 years. Kind of launched into it through She Recovers. I'm a trusted advisor for them in the anti-racism space for them. And that kind of pushed me into doing the detailed work that I'm doing now. But what started it off for me was I attended a conference in 2018, I believe it was. And there was a doctor that was speaking there on the disparages between the crack epidemic and the opioid epidemic and how those two epidemics were handled differently. And the audience just wasn't prepared for the conversation. They just really weren't prepared for it. Folks were really uncomfortable. And, you know, these were some of our brightest stars in attendance, you know, those folks that were kind of given the mantle to kind of figure out what we were going to do regarding the opioid epidemic and how we could rally behind what needed to happen and the changes that we wanted to make, you know, in terms of legislation and all of that. But they couldn't handle this one piece. And I said, you know what, this is the missing link, the link between how do we connect the dots for folks where they value people that look different and live differently than them. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I started, and that's kind of what pushed me and my interest into doing anti-racism training.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So why do you think it is that the addictions field needs anti-racism training?
Yeah, just kind of perfect segue, right? Just kind of pulling from what I just said. There's really a lack of understanding, I think, on how racism impacts recovery. Racism is trauma, right? It's and it's not just a traumatic event. It's the system that we live in that's racist, right? And so not necessarily one treatment center or one person, but just the systemic racism that exists that permeates the systems that we use, the healthcare system, the education system, the employment system, that impacts insurances and what's covered, what's not covered. And so all of this kind of bleeds into the industry that we're in, which is addiction industry, right? And so I think that being able to understand how racism impacts individuals that are in treatment is just a benefit. It's just a benefit. It's a gain. It's a necessary element to really being able to give quality services and to be culturally competent. I think we really need to understand where different folks are coming from and the cultural differences, and that leads into understanding how racism impacts them. And so I think that's important that our field really understands that.
Great. Yes. So can you just tell us a little bit about the services you provide and maybe give us an example of some of the work you've done in the past?
Sure. So all of the services, I mean, I'm single-minded and single-focused. So I work exclusively in the anti-racism field with treatment centers throughout the United States and Canada. I'm getting them familiar with this idea of anti-racism. So I talk a little bit about the origins of racism, the history of racism. We talk about racial trauma, microaggressions, white supremacy, allyship. That's kind of a eagle's view of what the training entails. And I've worked with She Recovers. I've worked with Women for Sobriety. That was a fantastic project, working to educate their facilitators. I've worked with Mobilize for Recovery. We did a seminar with them. And so I've worked both on an individual level with facilitators from a particular group, and then also on a broader scale, giving a presentation to just a larger group of people.
Thank you. So is there anything else you'd like to add about what makes your training and your approach unique?
Sure. I think what makes it a little unique is that it's tailored to addiction and treatment, right? It's really tailored to how, so I talk about these different elements that I mentioned earlier, and then I follow up with how these elements impact recovery, right? So with each topic, I go into, okay, so if we're talking about racism, then I go into how racism impacts the treatment field. If we're talking about racial trauma, we talk about how it impacts the treatment field. So I think what makes it unique is that it's really tailored towards treatment organizations that are working with marginalized communities. The other thing is that I give some history that I think is a little bit different. So we have kind of like a historical backdrop to understand where it has originated, how it impacts our society. So I think the historical background and also the specialized view for treatment centers is what kind of makes it unique.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Shari.
Thank you. I appreciate you.